Good evening, everyone. This is kanishk for IAS Edge, starting with the French Revolution World History GS Paper 1. And today we are discussing French Revolution. It refers to a series of events that happened in France, started in 1789, lasted till 1815. It refers to an era of ideological, political, and social changes in the history of France and Europe, during which the French polity underwent a radical change, and that radical change was that from an absolute monarchy where privileges were reserved to republics to republicanism based on equality and justice. From absolute monarchy, it turns into a republic. Republic means no blue blood, where there is no royal blood, but the head of the state is elected. Like for example, India. President of India is the head of the state, and it's an elected post. Unlike England is not a republic. It's a constitutional monarchy because we still have kings and queens there. So it's not an event. French Revolution is not an event. It's a living legend. There are reasons we call it so. Before proceeding, I would like to tell you something that see, any revolution do not tend to break out due to the will of the people, but rather because the people become involved in revolution as victims of circumstances. And the entire part of 18th century, a revolutionary spirit had been growing within Europe, and it was one of rationalist criticism and of opposition to powers like the Roman Catholic Church, the absolute monarchy, and the privileged nobility. So these were the hindrances that people thought should be removed, and it was nursed by a formidable array of French men of letters. How it happened, how it everything turned up. The monarch, the king Louis 15, he was from Bourbon dynasty. He lost the 7 years war to Britain. Britain and France fought for 7 years. It's known as 7 Year War. And his successor Louis 16 was the worst man to lead France in 1774. He was actually a very inept person, uh, an unwilling ruler. Okay, and he hoped to use American Revolution as an opportunity to expel British. So we have seen in the earlier session when we studied American Revolution. In 1782, he sealed an alliance with Peshwa Madhurao Narayan against the British and sent his troops to North America to fight Britain. So wherever Britain was, whether in America or in India, French were against the Britain, and they were helping those who were fighting the British, like Peshwa Madhurao Narayan in India and Americans. So what happens when you open so many fronts? You are helping Indians, you are helping Americans, so that ought to bring some pressure on your resources. And it started the beginning of a financial collapse of France. And as I told you, Louis XVI was incompetent. He was fully dependent on feudal elements, and these feudal elements monopolized the government, and there was rampant corruption in France. And he believed in the divine rights of king, that the king has been sent by God to rule. One of the characteristic feature of absolute monarchy. And the king and queen lived lavishly. They lived lavishly. They spent so much on their personal stuffs. Ceremonies were held for their waking up. Can you imagine? For their dressing up, for their meals and sleeping. So they could easily put some Indian Nawabs to shame. And Louis XVI only focused on meals and wine. How nice. Only focused on meals and wine. He was inept for rule, not fit to rule. And his queen Mary was obsessed with fashion. She was nicknamed Madame Deficit. There's a reason why she is named so. She used to actually spend a lot, actually invest a lot on her makeup. Okay, there were ceremonies for her makeup. So and so much time and money was wasted on her makeup that she was called Madame Deficit by the people, because on one hand the economy is collapsing, and on one hand we have a queen who spends everything on herself, and they could not conceive for 7 years after their marriage. Louis was suffering from phimosis, it's a sexual disorder, and he was scared of surgery. That's why they could not conceive, they could not have a child. And Madame Deficit was blamed for it. That she couldn't even give us ye hame bachcha nahi de pai wala stuff. Okay, so she was the one who was blamed, and she came from Austria. Now French considered themselves superior to Austrians. So there was one already this feeling that she is from Austria. Second, she could not give us a child. The problem lied with the man, but still the woman was blamed. 1788, there was a political crisis in France, a food shortage, and king increased the taxes in order to raise revenue. Price of bread had doubled, and there were riots over food. Shopkeepers were lynched. Jack Nicker was made the finance minister, and he was quite popular with the people because of his pro people policy. So he calls a meeting of state general. What was a states general? We need to understand it was a representative body of the kingdom. Okay, and it was first meeting in the last 175 years because these people, the Bourbon dynasty, the rulers, never thought it appropriate to call the meeting. So for first time in 175 years, the meeting was called, and there was a guy called Maximilian Robespierre. He was a lawyer and excellent orator, and he started passionately advancing the causes of poor. 4th of May 1789, Robespierre comes to argue at States General to voice people's concern. And the States General, the same representative body, had been called to address the country's fiscal and agricultural crisis. The meeting was being called, and Robespierre was speaking there. Now, these were the classes into which the French society was divided. There were three states: the clergy, nobility, and everyone else. You can see it on your screen. Okay. Clergy constituted the first state, the aristocracy comprised the second state, and the rest of the population formed the third state. Now, see, first two states enjoyed many privileges. They were even exempt from most of the taxes. So clergy and nobles need not pay tax. One first state, clergy, it controlled almost 15% of resources. 1% of people comprised of the first state, and 1% of were in possession of 15% of resources. They paid no taxes. They were given grants by the king. They even collected tax. The tax was named TITHE, was the tax which the church collected from people, and they issued sin letters. Like you made a mistake and you want to apologize or you want to confess, so go to church. The church will issue a letter to you which will be signed on behalf of God. You will get it after you pay a handsome amount. Okay, so this was a very innovative concept by the church. The second state consisted of nobles. They controlled 20-25% of resources, and they were also only 2%. So you can see that 3% of people are controlling almost 40% of resources. Government jobs were reserved for the nobles and they were exempt from tax again. The third state was the common man. So everyone else was suffering. Okay. And this French Revolution, it can be seen as an example of a bourgeois revolution. We have seen these terms, bourgeois and proletariat, because the third state consisted of, it was not a monolithic entity. There were many people into it. And there's a famous book, A Tale of Two Cities, written by Charles Dickens. It's considered as a cult classic. Those who have a background of literature must be aware of it. Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. He has excellently summed up the revolution in this novel, A Tale of Two Cities. So coming back, Robespierre demanded that the nobles and clergy should also pay taxes. I told you these people were exempt from taxes, and there were issues particularly related to representation, like who would be in the states general, why only first or second state people would be there. Okay, and they said that let third state also participate. Now, on June 20th, 1789, the members of French State General for the third state, who had begun to call himself the National Assembly, they took over what is known as tennis court oath, vowing not to separate and to resemble wherever circumstances require until the constitution of the kingdom is established. It was a pivotal event in the early days of French Revolution. What happened was these people were not allowed to go into the States General, the third state people, because the first and second stage feared that they are so much in number that they will outnumber us and they will be able to do what they want. So the doors were closed, the guards were brought. So the third state people went to a tennis court and they declared the tennis court as the state general. Like, this is the state general, that one is invalid. Here we are, that is valid. Now the storming of Bastille, King's men took position and Louis fired Necker. Necker, was popular with the masses. And people attacked Bastille, the medieval fortress. It was an armory, a political prison in Paris. Okay. And there were seven inmates, there were seven prisoners who were there. People went into that, okay, and they set everyone free. They looted the arms and everything. And it was seen as a symbol of abuses by the monarchy. So it was one of the a major flashpoint of the French Revolution, the storming of Bastille. Governors and guards were killed, their heads were cut, and they were paraded on pikes. Okay, they उनके सर काट करके भाले पे लगा के लोग बाहर निकल रहे थे फिर. Imagine, French Revolution is a bloody revolution, lot of blood flow. And this is what happened: Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen. That's the original document that you have saying. And everything, the good things which we will discuss now was brought here. The bill transformed the life of French citizens and the world. Ideas of liberty, equality, and fraternity emanate from here. Liberty, equality, and fraternity. See, our preamble, the preamble to the Constitution of India, have these terms. National Assembly mentions that sovereignty belongs to the people and promulgates a constitutional monarchy. They are still in favor of constitutional monarchy, like we have in England right now. Justice, equal rights, free press. Okay, so these things were ushered in. Now, there were some causes for this revolution. Now, what were the causes of these revolutions? That we'll see. It's not on the slides. I'll just dictate this to you. So please listen. You might note it down, or these sessions will be uh, on the site as well as on the channel of YouTube. So no need to worry about it. So what were the causes? In order to study any revolution, we need to have three causes: social causes, economic causes, and political causes. So if we see the social cause, first state, which consisted of clergy, and the second state, which consisted of aristocrats and nobles. Third stage, the common people. So I told you that clergy was exempt from tax. 1% of population they were, and they were exempt from tax, and they collected tax in the form of what is called tithe, T-I-T-H-E, and they led a very luxurious life. And there was rampant corruption in church. Second part was aristocracy. Almost one third of the population of the country, and they also had very much privileged life they were leading, like the clergy. They did not pay any tax. They lived at the expense of the peasants' labor. Third state, whopping 95% of the population, and the the third state was made of there were I told you it's not a monolithic entity. There were several classes existing together there, like the rich businessmen, the industrialists, the intellectuals, the laborers, the peasants, and they were the one who bore the brunt of taxation. The French economy was predominantly agrarian. It was agricultural driven economy, and in 1789, out of total 25 million population of France, about 20 million were peasants. Therefore, it is correctly said that it was an agrarian economy. So you see, it's an unequitable society. 3% people in possession of 40% of resources, not paying taxes. getting hereditary privileges, getting government jobs, and 95% of people are living to the edge. So, an unequal society is a breeding ground for a revolution. We all know this. Now, the second cause, the economic cause. I told you the Bourbon dynasty, the Louis ruler was, they were having imperial ambitions. And Louis 16 waged wars. Louis 14, it started from Louis 14. Okay. And Louis 15 continued it. But these two people, Louis 14 and 15, were at least more capable than Louis 16. And 16, the Louis 16 met with failures. He had a very weak personality. He was opposed by the aristocracy, so he could not do much. The main cause of this economic crisis was that there was disparity in taxation. First and second state were exempt from tax. Only the people belonging to third state were obliged to pay tax. Therefore, the conditions of farmers were very bad. And there was a depression in 1778, and the very next year in 1787 there was a crop failure in France. French economy was in a state of shambles. The price of commodities had decreased, and because of this the profits went down. So when the price increases there is inflation, when the price goes down there is loss in profit. You will study this in economics. So profits were low, the price of food, the production fell. Okay. Because the profits were low, so labor was laid off. People could not find jobs, even the workers and the peasants. So that resulted in an increase in price of food stuff. So what was the way out? There was just one way out, was to cut the expenditure and increase the income. But French were involved in wars, so the expenses were mounting, and there was a considerable dent in the French exchequer. And as I told you, the French king and Madame Deficit, they were living a life of extravagance. Okay, so these people could not control their expenses. So this was the economic reason. And social, when we talk about social reason or political reason, we have already seen the social causes. Now see the political causes. These are very interrelated stuffs. The 18th century France was undergoing an era of enlightenment, and whenever there is a repressive regime, whenever people are being marginalized, then the role of writers and philosophers and thinkers becomes very important. And the growing resentment, discontent, widespread social and economic disparity, you know, this resulted in social unrest. And revolution originates in human mind, and so it is the intelligentsia and philosophers who usher in this revolutionary spirit. So there were many philosophers. We will come across them: Montesquieu, Voltaire, Rousseau, Mabley, Lingret, Quinsney. So I'll tell you briefly about them. There was this guy called Montesquieu, one of the most prominent exponents of Enlightenment, and he was an admirer of the state and social system of England. He wrote several books. There were many great works by him, like The Spirit of Laws, and he expounded his famous theory of separation of powers. He says, sorry, that distinct separation of power among the legislature, judiciary, and administrative wings of government was desirable. See, when you will study the Indian Constitution, you will see that we are following what is known as a system of checks and balances. Judiciary, legislative, and executive keep a check and balance on each other. And who said this? Montesquieu said this. He way back in 16th, 17th century. Okay, he was born in 1689. He died in 1755. So way back in 17th century, someone was saying this. Else, it would be impossible to curb autocracy if these separation of power is not brought. and he did not believe in republics or democracy. Okay, so he had this tinge of revolutionary spirit, but he was not in favor of revolution. He was not, also not in favor of abolishing the privilege of church and the aristocracy, but he wanted a separation of power. Now, there was this guy Voltaire, 1694. He was born in 17th century, you can call it. He died in 1778, and he like Montesquieu, he was also an admirer of English model, the constitutional monarchy, and he attacked the Roman Catholic Church. And for him, church was a synonymous with religious bigotry. He was not an atheist; he believed in God, but he was against the church. And he was neither supported. He has neither supported democracy nor cared for the interest of people. He just spoke against and he wrote at length against the church. There was another guy, Rousseau. Okay, one of the greatest thinkers, Jean Jacques Rousseau. And he was more extremist and a bit close to revolution. He came up with his famous the social contract theory, and he says that man was honest and happy in his natural condition, the early man when he used to live in caves. But as the society evolved, it created division among people, and this was the source of unhappiness. And he says in his social contract theory, this is the most famous theory of Rousseau, that the state and society should evolve out of a social contract between all members of society and the sovereign ruler. It means a ruler will rule because people are wanting him to rule, and this wanting is referred as the general will of the people. Okay, so these people started questioning the status quo. Now, when the status quo was questioned, several new things emerged. People were already not very fond of uh, the dynasty. People were already not very much compassionate towards uh, the rulers, the Bourbon dynasty that was ruling, especially Louis XVI. Economic condition was not good. There were wide scale disparities. So a very ripe time for revolution. Okay, and we shall see here. Let us skip the part of Napoleon over here. Napoleon will arrive late. First, we need to see what all happened here. And it is a bloody revolution, as I told you. So, once the Bastille is conquered, people just went inside the Bastille, and there was now a rural unrest here because the king was imprisoned. And when people stormed into Bastille, the king and queen were not there. Okay, the king, the Louis XVI, went on some a hunting spree, and here when the queen was told that Madam Deficit, that people are here to meet you, they are very angry, they are very discontent. She asked, "What's the reason? Why are they angry?" So she was answered, "Because they have not bread. I told you the price of bread had doubled. Okay, so they had no bread to eat." And the woman replies that if they don't have bread, why don't they eat cake? Which means that she was unaware that cake is more expensive than bread. This is the disconnect they had with the people. So this is all that we need to see today. I shall continue with the next part and the Napoleon Wala stuff and what the French Revolution impact that it made uh, in the next session. So for now, this is all what we have.